Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second breakout session. As you can tell, Dean forgot to give me the memo around the shorts. However, I'm sure some of you are thinking where the rest of my trousers are and why they're so scared of my shoes. So my name is Ross McCarthy. I will be your host for the next 20 to 25 minutes. And before I introduce, or should I say reintroduce Dean, we would like to start with Slido again. I'm sure you're now picking up this is a bit of a running theme for the Softcat cloud event. So if you could log on to the hybrid cloud ops room, we have a couple of questions. See, Dean, I'm not a better person with the clicker, am I?
Click.
We have our first question. So how many of you currently sat here today are already using or are thinking about using implementing a cloud-based platform within your IT infrastructure? So it's a simple yes or no, whether you're thinking about doing it or already using it. And we should get some real life answers.
Come on, you can do it. You can do it. Well, you get a free lunch. But you have to buy your drinks later if you don't do it.
I think, to be fair, the general consensus is something like M365, other SaaS-based platforms. You are already, hopefully all here today, using some form of a cloud-based platform. The second question is kind of going to that a bit more depth. If it loads for me. No. Which is, how many of you today are already using a multitude of cloud platforms? So think Azure with AWS. Probably a very popular one is Azure and M365, or any other SaaS applications alongside something like GCP. So a combination of maybe two or more cloud-based platforms. So I think, as we can see, here we go, we get some answers through. Reasonably about average on all of them. So again, it's apparent that we are utilizing a lot of cloud-based platforms within IT at the moment. So over the next 20 minutes or so, these are kind of the challenges around operating this cloud-based model and these linking it to your hybrid infrastructure that we're going to look at. We're going to explore these in a bit more detail and hopefully come with some tools and solutions around how you can simplify all that complexity. So without further ado, please allow me to pass over to Dean, or reintroduce Dean, who's going to take it from.
Quite like that game. That's good, isn't it? Can't see GCP on there. It's disappeared. So just kick off this canvas. We drew this canvas about 18 months ago. And it's a really simple picture, but we think it represents and depicts essentially where a lot of our customers are. And obviously, traditional customers, a few years ago, data center, hardware, infrastructure, put it in the data center. That's pretty much what you did. And obviously you went to maybe to a hoster or an outsourcer. And obviously with public cloud being introduced, as it's been over the last 10 years and a bit longer in some cases, that landscape's grown. And obviously the considerations of how you integrate and connect those environments, how you secure those environments are becoming more and more relevant in terms of how you think about your cloud strategy. So it then becomes down to how do you operate, how do you manage that more effectively? And that's why the management layer is in there as well. In addition, the rise of edge is now really taking hold, and how you then build these micro environments that sit on the edge that also have to interact and connect into these environments. It's a landscape that's got complex. It's a landscape that continues to get complex. And if you delve into the next layer underneath that canvas, because that's a simple canvas, you can look at that. We then get to essentially what we've got today in a lot of cases, which is these silos. And so you just clicking as you did, you're using AWS, you're using Azure, you're using, well, maybe not using Google, but some people are. And there's Oracle in there as well, which I don't think we've put up as an option, but people are using Oracle Cloud more. And then you've got all the SaaS environments that you've got to integrate and set up your identity strategies for. And that also is on top of what's happening on that right-hand side over here, where you've still got a lot of that legacy, that on-premises infrastructure, where you're looking to modernize that as well. When you look down the bottom here, as you can see, you've got management operations and operations teams that are having to now upskill and look after those silos. And it's becoming more and more of a challenge when essentially a lot of operations teams are born or trained out of infrastructure, essentially the right-hand side of that box. And also, do you want to be building specific Azure teams, AWS teams, to look after and operate those platforms as developers continue to develop against those platforms, basically, and sprawling and scaling their demands? How do you manage and operate those platforms? And you heard from Kieran, how do you secure those platforms? And certainly what we try to do is to understand that landscape in a more effective way. And I'll give you some stats, because we like stats. Canalys basically has said that expenditure was over 2 billion more than in the previous quarter. And this is cloud spend, by the way. This is cloud spend infrastructure. Canalys data estimates that over 2 billion more was spent than in the previous quarter, and that 14 billion more than in Q1 in 2021. So that's up. So the top 3 cloud service providers grew collectively 42% year on year, with no signs of them dropping. So we've got some huge percentage growth, and that's from last year to this year, and that's only going to expedite next year, and this landscape will continue. But fundamentally, you can't stop that top layer. Developers are going to continue to develop and build, and you're going to continue to consume platforms that sit on that top layer. How do you address this bottom layer? We talk about app and data transformation, and we'll talk about that later. That's happening. But how are you upskilling? How are you bringing your operational teams into basically teams that can operate effectively across those platforms? You can click on the next slide. And so what we typically are doing and working with customers is to understand what essentially these 5 components look like. And we recommend that you should be asking this question yourselves. So how do you build a consistent management and operational layer that is able to ingest and look after all of those platforms effectively? How do you create a consistent dev experience? It doesn't matter what the developer wants to develop against. You're giving them an API to develop against, but you are operating it and managing it for them and on their behalf. How do you build a security layer that can span and aggregate all of those platforms into a central platform via API, where you're monitoring the network traffic, you're monitoring the Kubernetes clusters, you're monitoring the whole stack from a VM and IaaS perspective, a PaaS perspective, in a security layer, aggregated layer. How do you then connect those platforms? How do you build that interconnectivity, not just from the private cloud to the public cloud, but how do you then connect across multiple clouds? Because that is now possible. Not coming into a traditional MPLS, but using SD-WAN technology. How do you bring that into your strategy? And how do you then bring your business operations along? How they pay the bills, how they can then receive that invoice on the desk and know what it is, who owns it, and why they're paying it. Ultimately, these are the 5 levels of responsibility that organizations need to take responsibility for on the operational side. People call it CCOE, which is a Cloud Center of Excellence, or even a Center of Excellence. We think that is quite grand, and that's quite grandiose, and it can get complicated in itself. So we think if you can break it into these 5 subcomponents, and you can ask yourself, how are you doing consistent management and operations across this landscape? How are you creating a consistent dev experience for your developers? How are you securing all of these platforms? How are you then connecting all of these platforms? And how are you bringing your business along to be able to manage, bill, and look after the transaction of these consumption platforms? And basically, there's some really simple rules. Consistent management and operations, there's an emerging market of vendors now and service partners. And ultimately, you've got a choice. You can buy a product or a series of products that tie together, or you can outsource or outtask to a service provider that can take ownership on your behalf. You can upskill your teams, but that's hard. So how do you then start validating or looking at that consistent management operations? What are the options available? Certainly, we can talk about that in a minute with something we're doing at the moment. How do you then encourage your developers? How do you understand what they're doing from a tool perspective? Because they're using a lot of tools and open source tooling. How do you then start looking at tooling and taking that operational layer away from them? A lot of developers don't like relinquishing that control. So you need to give them an option and say, we'll do that, and this is how we're going to do it. And the same with security, the same with the connectivity, and the same with business ops. So there's questions to be asked against each one of these layers. Next slide. And so we're addressing this. We've created, I call it the fidget wheel framework. That's not officially a title, but I just think it looks like a fidget wheel. And basically what it is, it's a consultative tool that we've built. And it's basically clicking on the subcomponents. So if you think about the canvas we showed before, we've gone into the silos. We've got the 5 pillars of areas we think you should focus on. And we've got a tool that we have got consultants and specialists who can come in, sit with you, and ask you these questions using this tool. What are you doing around your compute? What are you doing around your cloud? What are you doing about your business operations? How are you connecting these things? And what we've basically done is built essentially a whole series of tooling which can do comparisons. We can look at product comparisons. We can look at the security layer and say, these are the security products you've got today that's managing your on-premise infrastructure. These are the security components you're using in public cloud. These are the tools and these are the services we recommend you can look at to consolidate that. This is how you can build an operating model for security using these tools. These are best practice if you're in Azure, AWS, Google, and you're on-prem. It's basically a consulting tool to understand what you have today, match where you're going and what you're using, and then basically building that meat in that sandwich, if you will. Building that layer in the middle, we can aggregate a set of tools we know work effectively for customers. And we're doing this across automation, observability, the abstraction layer. These are all areas of subcomponents. We're going from that canvas, we're delving into those 5 areas, and then we're really getting into what you're doing as a business, what you're using, and then we're giving you information for you to make a decision whether that's a product or whether it's a service. And this tool essentially is interactive. So obviously we can go through any one of these subcomponents to understand where you are.
Cool. Thank you, Dean. So I suppose you've mentioned there, Dean, a lot around the tooling, especially with the fidget wheel, in helping organizations, supporting them on operating that hybrid cloud model and that infrastructure. I suppose looking at the market today around the tools, the technologies, potential partners out there, is there anything that's springing to mind alongside our fidget wheel is supporting, that is a very good layer that organizations can look to?
Yeah, so one that springs to mind we've looked at over the last sort of 12 months is there's a real emerging market around connectivity. So obviously you look at MPLSs and we're looking at global MPLSs. How do you break down those barriers? How do you not renew, in some cases, that model? And you have to then break down where your platform sits today in terms of your local LAN connectivity and your public cloud. And what you're seeing there is the emergence of products like Aviatrix or Volterra, which recently got bought by F5. These software layers sit as an interconnected platform, essentially allows you to connect not only your on-prem but your public clouds together and enable your networking team to upskill. So there's products out there that are starting to really innovate to bring the multi-cloud together in a much more effective way. You've got FinOps tools, there's tools that we use. We have a cloud intelligence service, which you'll hear about a bit later. We can ingest data from multiple clouds and start shaping, tagging, giving you visibility of security, visibility of assets that are being used proactively to present information and data back to you for you to make better decisions on what's being used, how it's being used, and who is using it. So when the bill does come through, you can quite quickly show that back to the business and say, this asset isn't being used, it's being used, is it being used accurately? You can start building budgets and you can really start forecasting spends. These areas are really important for organizations to do business ops, but also ingest that data from this multi-cloud landscape to effectively make better decisions. There's areas like security, you would have heard from Kieran, that consolidation piece, being able to build a security layer that allows you to ingest that data from an API perspective for your security teams to take ownership of what's happening in these multiple platforms. So there's products, but also there are services that are available that allow you to essentially outtask or essentially simplify what in most cases is a sprawling software layer of operational products that sit in your on-premises environment. And also when you're talking about cloud migrations, we see this a lot. People run cloud migration, cloud assessments against their estate. They look at all the virtual machines. If you typically talk to a Microsoft and AWS, they'll tell you what it costs to move them, what the cost is to move into their clouds. What you can do is start extracting that information more effectively to start looking at the operational layer tools and the virtual machines that are running in your on-premises estate, where those operational tools don't need to run anymore. You can start extracting those and putting them into SaaS-based operational tools. So SaaSifying your ops with this layer of abstraction, essentially. And if you start doing that and building that operational layer that's effective, you can start removing more VMs from your on-premises estate and making them cloud ready. So being able to understand that landscape of taking essentially those operational VMs that are running on-prem, moving those into cloud, but not just moving the VMs, actually moving it to services that are now available is a huge step. That's something that is now more possible than ever before.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think certainly touching on that, simplifying and understanding costs. I'm sure everyone sat here today will nod their head around having that understanding and going to the finance team to explain it is certainly something relevant to everyone. I suppose the final question we have is based on kind of your experience in looking at the wider landscape. As you rightfully said, this area isn't stopping, it is growing. As you look to the future, based on your specialty within the field and working with customers, what I suppose excites you the most as we continue on that adoption and that growth in that direction?
So I think that there's a massive momentum that multi-cloud is becoming common. It's becoming something that you're going to be doing. So being able to address the operational complexity, it excites me. It's not the most exciting thing, but being able to fix that problem and that challenge for customers is really important for us. But also when you start looking at the next wave of, and I mentioned it earlier on in the keynote, if you're in there, we're seeing things like metaverse coming into play. We're seeing the way that, the evolution of the way the end user is using their tools and interacting with their peers and basically using technology as a driver essentially to innovate and do more. So RPA, being able to do process automation, giving the power to the user to do those things, and training and upskilling, efficiencies in the workforce, being able to put wearable headsets on and kind of bring that innovation into different industries. We're seeing that emerge in industries like health and construction, being able to kind of bring those innovative technologies into stuff that you're using now with the Microsoft suite, really stepping into that new world. There is a next wave of technology coming that's on top of what essentially we're showing as complex here. So you've just got more complexity coming, but that's exciting for us. So there's a range of areas. RPA is a big one, process automation, intelligent automation, huge area. That whole thing of augmented reality and immersed worlds. There's a whole bunch of stuff over the next few years you're going to see in that space. So those sort of things excite certainly me. And the other thing I mentioned earlier was that data challenge. We're seeing a lot more customers wanting to know what's happening with their data. So data assessments against structured and unstructured, and shaping what data strategies are moving forward, getting insights and extracting value out of that data is a huge area for us. And I think from our customers' perspective, that's what we're seeing. So again, I said it earlier, it'd be interesting to get people's perspectives on those areas, if you're seeing some of those things, and certainly if what I've said today resonates in any shape or form.
Perfect, thank you. And yeah, that sort of comes to the conclusion of our second session. As Dean said, please use Slido to submit any questions that you would like to address. Dean and I will be out in the lobby shortly, but it is my great pleasure to announce that it's lunchtime. So lunch is through to the next two rooms. All the food and drink is out there. Please help yourself. And I believe our next session is at 1:30. If I get a nod, we get a thumbs up. So at 1:30. So please, enjoy lunch. We'll be out in the lobby for any other questions or Slido. Thank you.